All right, so I will start with sort of the system, how we're going to go about learning this. And this system comes from a combination of studying how people have learned historically, all the way from the ancient Greeks, sort of traditional methods of enhanced memory and enhanced ability to just remember long amounts of information. People used to, in oral traditions, be able to memorize word for word long classical works by using various systems so that they could go from village to village and recite it before the printing press came along and made it easier just to give people books. And so people used to memorize, massive documents, and still do a little bit memorize, like the Torah or the Quran. But a lot of these techniques that people have used traditionally to remember things have been mostly lost to the general public after the advent of the printing press. And so some of those techniques we use in this system to learn languages, but it is also informed by sort of what I have studied in neuroscience about the different levels of the brain and thinking about really the three main levels that we have in our brain, which is the top part being the cerebral cortex part up here, where we process most of our abstract information. That's called the neo-mammalian part of the brain. And then there is the middle part of the brain, which is the limbic system, which has little organs in it called the amygdala and the hippocampus. And that part of the brain is called the paleomammalian, or old mammal part of the brain. It's the part of the brain that we share with all other mammals. And it's the emotional part of the brain, rather than the abstract part. And that emotional hardcore driver is called the amygdala. And that's what I think classicists would have thought of as the heart, quote unquote. So when you have things like the verse in the Bible that says, I've hidden thy word in my heart, that I might not sin against thee. That I've, memorized things hidden in my heart, or know something by heart, we have as an idiom still in English. That reflects the fact that we have to get through that emotional part of the brain to be able to get into the memory. So in that part of the memory, if it's not something that resonates with it, it really can't ingest a lot of information very quickly or very easily at all. They say that the amygdala with the hippocampus there has kind of like a little monitor screen, if you will, up on it. And you can hold, depending on the capacity of your hippocampus, 5 facts at a time, plus or minus 2. So if you're going to try to learn a few things, you might just go a little bit at a time and slowly climb along. And if you're going to try to memorize thousands of words or 90 different conjugations of the verbs, or memorize a book, it would seem very overwhelming because you're thinking about how that memory monitor can do 5 plus or minus 2 things at a time, and you're like, oh my gosh, going on with crawling, it's going to take a really long time to climb Mount Everest. So how would you do that? However, if we are using the amygdala and the hippocampus the way they're supposed to be used, in an emotional, visual, more visceral kind of way, we can get things in there much faster. For example, when you walk into my apartment, if you came into the apartment and I told you, okay, now you're going to have 10 seconds to look around the apartment room here, then walk out and tell me, everything that you could have seen. Every color you could have seen in the room, every piece of furniture, every wall that you saw, anything that you saw on the walls, you would all get much, much, much more than 7 pieces of information. Like, really, really fast.
Mm-hmm.
But if I told you, okay, now I'm going to tell you, 7 words in 10 seconds in Spanish, and then have you remember them all, You wouldn't be able to get anywhere near close to as many details as you could have told me about what you saw in my apartment in those few minutes. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to go away from trying to process everything on the neo-mammalian level of the brain, the cerebral cortex, trying to get down into the paleo-mammalian level of the brain, into the amygdala and the hippocampus, through that kind of space that you can touch and feel, that space that would make sense to a mouse or a cat or a dog just the same way it makes sense to us. It would feel real. And so because that part of our brain would recognize that as real stuff, rather than just abstract, floating around weird ideas, it would say, oh, that's important. I'm going to scratch that into the hippocampus, and it would get encoded. And so we basically kind of have to get into that older primal part of ourself and encode things there. One great example of how